Yeah, Renato, you were mentioning you were kind of on and off there, but you were certainly studying with him, and he showed you what he wanted to show you. But with Jason, Jason was there damn near every day,
For a while, yeah.
and Jason was there for a specific thing, and of course we were all friends with Sonny, and you know it's fair to say that you were friends with him too, but you were under there with a very formal way of saying, "I'm the student, I want to learn something specific," and you didn't necessarily say, "I want to learn all of it, I want to learn all the curriculum. I have a specific need because I'm a doorman and other things that I might not be privy to." And you needed to learn specific things like we talked about in the previous episode. Could you explain or describe the stuff that you guys were learning and perhaps the evolution from first gen, if you have any insight in that?
Yeah, I think from what I saw, and always, correct me if y'all don't agree, but going from first, second, third, what I saw was him kind of like completing his the what you want to call it, orchestra or whatever, like was you guys were kind of you were the final performance kind of thing, and what he wanted to show to the world, and have his name attached to it. And in my opinion, it was a much lighter version of kind of what we went through, and I think there was a lot of reasons for that. I think I know it had experience in the past with people that he'd known that had, done some not so great things, and it really affected him, and he felt responsible, and he couldn't stop teaching. Like, I don't think he ever could stop teaching physically. Like that was just, he had to do that. He had so much stuff he had to get out of his head. But I do believe that I showed up at the point where he was transitioning to teaching people how to teach themselves in a way of like,
that makes sense to me.
The flow, all that kind of stuff, where I don't know if this is going to be too esoteric for some people, but what I would call like an 80% lower, if that makes sense to anybody. So you can get a gun that's 80% of what it's supposed to be, and then you have to machine the rest of it to make it something that's functional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're already a machinist, it's not going to be that hard, right? But if you're not, you have a whole bunch of work that you have to commit to understanding how to make that thing worthwhile.
Yes.
And that was his like passive vetting, right? Because the people that wanted that didn't come up with it, that weren't part of that mentality or part whatever that is beforehand, you would have to work very, very hard to get there, and you would have to do it on your own.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So when I came in, I think he was still he was very clear that he wanted a different direction, and he
was explicit with that.
Yeah, he was really pretty, like he was, yes, definitely, like,
okay,
not in so many words, but like I can do this better. And I think he even did he did an article once, one of the few where he talked to somebody that got published in some obscure thing.
Oh, really?
Where he said the difference between my old style of teaching and new style of teaching, I can get people to where I want them, but I'm going to say something obscure, like 3 years sooner than I could with my old style of teaching. So there was that aspect of it as well. But I also believe that he specifically went into and wanted to put to the world something that was a dueling art. And while it's ultimately it's a sword fight and whatever else, or a knife fight or whatever else, a duel is very different than assault. A duel is very different than defense. A duel is very different than a lot of things. You can take those elements and work real hard and implement that and put that into, but you have to do it.
Right. Hence the 20%.
You have to take that and like teach yourself that part, right? And what I think he did with me mostly was he gave me 80% of the other stuff. And then I think he was waiting for me to stop doing homework in a lot of ways, right? So he could be like, well, if you don't, do this. But man, I did my homework. I went out there and like, I found people that were like willing to do dumb stuff and like, hey, let's put these on and let's see what happens. And I'd bring it back and I'd show them and be like, okay, man, then we like
Let's keep going.
go to the
Yeah.
next thing.
Yeah.
And like part of the funny stuff or the, popular training now, and you see all these guys on the bob dummies and stuff. And there
Sure.
weren't any bob dummies, and this is totally taking a page from him, because also part of it was like watching him make stuff, and then being part of that. And a lot of that came out of because I had to learn to stop saying, hey, that's cool, because you just give it to me. And then I
Right.
feel guilty about it, but then I also couldn't return it because I knew that would be insulting.
Insulting
Right.
too.
And so after the third or fourth time, instead of saying, hey, that's cool, I'd have to go, that's really neat how you did this. Can you show me how to do it? Right. And the fact that I got excited about like working on knives or working on all that kind of stuff, that was another aspect of our relationship, because if I'd show up at 1 PM and stay till I had to go to work at like 8 or 9 at night, 2 of those hours is sitting at his table working on knives or training tools or whatever that is.
Right.
But
Because that was
so
part
yeah,
of it.
so
Yeah.
I made my own bob, if you will, like in like '93, which was literally a couple of pieces of 2x4s with like an arm out, and I had a knife on the end of it, and I put it on some kind of rubber band that was attached to the floor, so I could spin the thing or hit it and spin it, and this thing would come back with a knife. And and because it's a 2x4 and it's not something soft, if you miss with a short blade, you're going to pay for it
Right.
badly. And yeah, you're getting hit in the knuckles with with a 2x4. And so he saw that commitment on my end, and I begrudgingly or not, was just like, okay, let's, we kept going. And a lot of it too was the necessity of bringing in stuff from work and saying, hey, this and this and this, and then watching him think about it, and his ability to break down stuff I talked a little bit about before, but was so ahead of its time too. And looking at people who talk about, the reality based stuff, and like, there's a lot of people out there that done amazing work, but he was doing this, in the early '90s, and his knowledge of it was much, much older. But that does allude to a much darker time. And even the attitude, the feeling of the place, the people that were in and out of there. Now, if regular students would come by, we'd go in the backyard and we work on flow.
Oh, really? By
Right?
that time already?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Pension.
Yep.
Okay.
So it felt very private to me. It was like, if it's just me there, then it's like, then we can kind of explore. But he was definitely conflicted, right? He was definitely he didn't want negativity out in the world, and that a lot of that stuff was really negative. But he also saw, like, hopefully, I think that I was there honestly trying to figure this out for myself, and the reasons behind it. And so I would say 90% of what we did was not stuff that he wanted outside as a finished product, right? Like, I believe that the end of the third generation, and beginning with Kevin, I would say is like a pretty good earmark there for that, is what he wanted to put in the world. And even though, like, we're sitting here and it's a blade based art, it's based as a dueling art, which is a conscious decision between two people to do something.
Right.
And whether it's purely for to see who's more athletic or whatever else, or if it is because of some ridiculous grudge match that's never going to happen, it was his highest expression of art within that, and you could see it in the way that the mood you walk into the place when you guys were there was very different. Was very different.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say, just to give you an idea, like, we used to work we would use cigarettes. Like, that was part of training. We would use cigarettes.
How so?
On distractions on the draw, flicking things in people's faces. We had a bucket across the room, and you flick the cigarette, draw the knife. Right? You don't see that in curriculums, right? Like, that was some pretty ahead of it,
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's like people focus on Sonny and they see his speed and they see his accuracy and they see his angles and like, how did he just do that? But what they don't see is the deception,
The pre-fight.
he was a magician in a lot of ways. Like his
Yeah,
sleight of hand
absolutely.
stuff, you don't
Distractions.
have to be
Mhm.
good like Sonny. You don't have to be fast. You don't have to be accurate. You don't have to be any of those things if you can deceive people,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And his deception was way up here, but he
Super
also
high.
his athleticism was also up here.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I still like, regardless of whoever watches or people's ideas on traditional versus other type of
Mhm.
arts, you just don't have any idea what it is to be in front of somebody like that and what they can do. It does seem otherworldly because of that
Mm.
sleight of hand stuff. There's some
Mhm.
famous like YouTube guy who's really funny out there. He's a martial art commentator, but he's like very sarcastic but very well meaning. And he says, uh, weird. He said, weird works. Like if you don't know what it is, you're gonna fall for it every time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Sonny had 10,000 of those things just lined up,
Yeah.
right? So anyway,
Yep. No,
that's
no, I can definitely testify to that and
yep.
some other things you were mentioning. I'm curious because you went there for specific things, and he showed you things that you needed and would be open to explore. But how much of that was second gen, for lack of a better word, curriculum? And
We
how
didn't
much
have
of
one.
it was it just your custom thing? Because again, if Sonny was a tailor, he was a custom suit maker kind
Sure,
of
sure,
thing.
sure.
And it sounds like he for sure was more bespoke for you. But then for the people in the back, how much of that was becoming more of a crystallized second generation material? And how
Like I
much of
said,
that was spillover for you?
I feel like when we had when we had other people show up, we would go to a much more traditional, if you will, like setting
Sure.
where we'd be go into the backyard and yeah, we did a lot of pendulum. We did
Okay.
I know we did first, second. I want to say we did third. I could be wrong, flow.
Okay.
But we did a ton of flow. We did a ton of Largo.
I see.
I love the bog side because it was like an axe handle,
Hmm. Yeah. Me too.
right? Made
Me
sense.
too.
And
You would.
yeah,
That's
but
funny.
that like the stuff that clicked with me is the stuff that made sense,
Gotcha. Of course. Of course.
and that to me was like that makes sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Definitely.
that and short knives like that's I never bothered with volley songs because I just didn't care
Mhm.
because they were illegal, and so I'm not going to carry something that
Right.
insult to injury and and he showed me some stuff, but
Mhm.
never with me the intent of learning stuff, and I was like, oh,
For
I'm
sure.
never gonna figure that out. Cool, moving on to something that is something I can
Yeah.
grasp and make sense for me.
Of course.
But yeah, we would have, like I said, the infrequent or frequent for short bursts of regular student stuff, and then that's what we would do. I wouldn't come
Mhm.
in with other people in there and be like, hey man, I want to do, like there's never any of that.
I see.
So
Okay.
there was definitely curriculum. There was definitely like flow based training,
Mhm.
and the randomness. The one of the first things he did with me with sticks was he was like, hey, you're going to be blocking random strikes with sticks today. And I had never done, and I was like, gave him a look, and he was like, what do you think? And I was like, okay. Sure.
Nice.
And he had a way, he figured it out. I can't tell you in a thousand years how we did it, but, it was like basic Sinawalian breaking from that pattern and
I
at
see.
least the 1 through 5. And,
Mhm.
and yeah, by the end of the time, it was like, oh, okay, I'm hitting random blocking, like in your first day. And like,
That's awesome.
that's pretty cool,
Yeah.
and that's only because of him and the way that he could do stuff. So we did a lot of traditional stuff. And I'd get older guys come in. So then I'd see some of the older curriculum.
Okay.
And, not that I understood it, but you
Mhm.
just try to survive,
Sure. Sure.
Um,
So they didn't
and,
show you. You were just kind of the uke for if you guys they went over.
Oh
it?
no, you
Okay.
had to do it. You had to
Uh-huh.
like, they're gonna do it, and then you try to do it, and then like back and until you figure it out,
I see. Okay.
and then we would do what I would consider an unrealistic weapon, but at full force training, like with machetes on certain days, where it's like, there was
Yeah.
there was no aluminum. We didn't use safety trainers. We just
Right.
used dull machetes, which are like very, very thin baseball bats.
Yeah, it still
If you
hurts.
get hit, you're in trouble.
Yeah,
And
you still get cut. Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, and broken bones. And so there was some like trial by fire stuff, and everybody had, from what I think is everybody had their cold showers, you're calling it. But there were times where like, I want you to push this as far as you can, because I still want to see, like, with all that fear, if I can still do what I'm supposed to do. And I missed a few times, and was lucky he was who he was, because we were swinging hard enough that these things they're sticking together.
Yeah.
Machetes are not like great tempered things. They're rolled
No,
flat
they're
sheet
soft.
steel.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Utility.
these things, we got to the point where sometimes we're like having to pull them apart. So you get hit with that, you're done. But it's putting that fear into you, because it should be. You should be afraid, because this is not, you're not sitting there in a bunch of pads and working on something, which is great for stuff, but it's like there's no room for error, and my only safety is him, because if I miss, which I have, where because he's, like I said, sleight of hand, and I think he's there, so I'm going that way, and then you fall for bait, and you go for that thing. But anyway, I'm getting off. But like, we did have regular stuff, but we did also very much have the connection of, like, I need this for work, and so he would work with me on that. But also too, I think part of that, and part of him being okay with doing some of that, was also he saw how I was learning through the like the craft and the making parts of stuff, and would see my commitment there too. And I never got good at that stuff. I got good enough to make it a job later, but not like, but not like, I don't consider myself a craftsman. I can, like, prototype stuff, but he saw my commitment there too. And if you have a well-designed knife, you can tell a lot about somebody by how they design something. Like, you can tell a lot.
For sure.
And so that was, I think, part in his mind, that was part of my curriculum too, was he was seeing what I was doing with that.
I love that.
Yeah, it was very cool. Anyway,
that's so awesome. No, that was great. I mean, being third gen, and, like, I guess the youngest of the whole crew, it's interesting to investigate and look back, because one, it's just like, I want to just know all of it, as far as material and how he came up with it, and the meaning and the journey he took to get there. But two, just to know him and to know his mindset and his whole approach behind it. And so it's great to hear all these stories and your firsthand accounts to it.